Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, friends, I'd like to try to make a start if we can, because there's a lot to get through, and I want to get through as much of it as possible before people start drifting off for inevitable other appointments and engagements. So, just in case you don't know me, I'm Bob Lowe. I'm the Deputy Director at the UCL Energy Institute, and I was one of the editors of the special issue that we put together on future challenges for energy and buildings research. I'm delighted to welcome so many people, and in particular so many faces, to our event this afternoon. I have a few words to say, if I can work out. There we go. Okay. First of all, housekeeping. We believe that there will be no fire alarm test this evening, this afternoon. So if the fire alarm does go, then we need to move by this exit, unless the exit is obviously blocked, in which case you leave by the back. And if you do leave by this exit, you go out by the route you came through. If you leave by the other exit, there's a separate set of stairs that takes you down into the front area of the Roberts building. WCs, there is a ladies immediately outside the double doors, and if you go past that to the lifts, on the right hand side of the lift there is a door which is not a lift, and that is the gents. Please don't mix up the two. So I think that's all of the obvious housekeeping. My next item is just a short list of absent friends. First of all, Richard Lorch drove this meeting forward, and it was an absolute rock in getting this event put together. He's not here this afternoon. He's in hospital. I don't think they're going to detain him for very long. He should be out, about, and he's out. He's out. My goodness, that means it was keyhole surgery. Fantastic. Okay. So Richard should be with us again, but unfortunately not today. The other person I want to mention is Alex Summerfield, who led the editing process. I was the passenger. Alex is in bed, and therefore unable to be here. He's also in Australia, which is why he's there are two reasons why he couldn't make it this afternoon. We've also had a couple of people ring through and say that they can't make it, and it would be lovely to have had them here. One of the things that I do want to do, and I just need to check with the speakers and the respondents, is to video, first of all, our speakers and then our respondents. If you're happy with that, we'll do that. But in order not to cramp the subsequent questions, debate from the floor, I propose to shut down the video once we get to questions from the floor. Are you comfortable with that? Okay. This? Okay, great. If anybody feels that for any reason they would like the video shut down, just say so, and we'll shut it. I mean, you can be as rude as you like, but there's reason about what's being said. Okay. I want to say just a few words about why we thought the special issue, why it was the right time for this particular special issue. This is a time of great change in energy and buildings research. We are probably moving decisively What an interesting statement. I'll probably read this. Only an academic could say that. From talking about deployment to deploying families of technologies at large scale. The point that I should, by the way, say that Taj and I will be alternating the chairing of this. So it will be one or other thin chap at the front, but it won't always be me. Just to, Taj will take over the whole thing. Thank you, Taj. As Taj reminded me earlier on this afternoon, we are likely to be spending billions of pounds on things like building retrofit over the next few decades, even if it's the low billions, even if it's not the hundreds of billions, which some of us think could be spent in this area. It will still be a lot of money at a time when the country doesn't have a lot of money. One of the ways I used to characterise energy and village research over the last 25 or 30 years was to say that there was an unwritten compact between the research community and funders and stakeholders. But the research community would be allowed to do research, but none of it would ever matter. And I think we're moving to a new world now, where people are actively interested in what we find out. We put together our call for papers, was put together around 4 bullet points: the scale of change, the rate of change, the scope of research, and interdisciplinary diversity. And I think we have papers that reflect most of those things, and if we don't, we have respondents who will pick them up. We have a rapidly evolving energy research landscape. We have energy demand in particular as the EPSRC shaping capabilities growth area. That means, I think, that it will not shrink in real terms, or not shrink in relative terms. I think growth has its local meaning, but who knows, it will come out in the wash. We have the energy end-use demand centres, which will be a feature of at least the next 5 years, and perhaps more. A very significant amount of money being spent to create the architecture of the rest of the decade. And of course we have UCL 3, which EPSRC announced a couple of months ago so the research, the landscape in which we research will, I think, be much more structured in the future than perhaps it has been in the past. And I think that structure will be necessary in order to accommodate the growth that will almost certainly take place and is almost certainly moving. Just to remind you of the programme, I think you have a programme in front of you actually, so perhaps I'll skip over this, except to say that for the next 40 minutes or so, we will have 4 presentations by 4 of the paper authors. We will then move on to 5 presentations by respondents. We have gone for a matrix structure here, so the respondents do not map onto the papers, the things that the paper authors will use in a one-to-one fashion, but they will kind of cross over. Hopefully that will generate the best possible discussion. We'll aim to finish just after 6 o'clock. The one thing I don't have on this, come in. One thing I don't have on this programme is questions. We will take questions as well. We will take very brief questions at the end of each of the presentations of fact, but we will open the floor to a discussion at the end of the respondents' responses and just before we move on to our reception. That, I think, brings me to the end of everything that I have to say. So I will just get Libby your presentation up. Backwards.
That's good.
That's good.
Is that me?
Just one forward.
Okay.
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 I will try to keep people fairly rigid with the time.
Try to stick to it, but hopefully not by talking too fast. Very briefly, what I want to talk about, Bob asked me about 2 weeks ago, he asked me if I would talk about interdisciplinarity. And I want to start just bracketing what I'm going to say with a confession, an anecdote, a problem, and an agenda. And the confession is that I'm relatively new to the area of construction research. I've been doing this for about 3.5 years. And in my past life, I actually did work on something at the intersection of sociology of science and comparative historical sociology, and I worked on statistical reasoning and disciplines. So I've actually been thinking about disciplines for a very long time. So that's the confession. The anecdote is, about a week ago, I had 2 colleagues at Reading, one's an engineer, one's an economist, and we meet periodically to talk about energy in buildings and our research and what we're doing. And I sort of mentioned what I thought I might say here, and one of them looked at me and he said, well, what's the problem? Why can't you take a method from one discipline and a theory from another one and bring in a few variables from another discipline and stick them into your model? And it was one of those moments that I realized how much work our interdisciplinary collaboration still had to do, because that was very foreign to my way or my training of how I did research. And that sort of came the background for the words of what I want to say here. So the problem is that I want to talk about very briefly is the incorporation of non-technical dimensions into the study of energy in buildings. And the agenda, or my agenda, is how do we develop a model for interdisciplinary research which preserves the specificity and the contribution of different types of knowledge in research. Very briefly, I want to introduce 1 or 2 analytic distinctions that I'm going to use, talk a bit about the contribution of interpretivist research. And I was told not to use the word interpretivist because it turns people off, and I haven't found a better word. But I just want to point out that it's not just about meaning and attitudes. It's about that, but I'll talk a little bit about what I mean by it. And then just end with a few observations or reflections on the challenge of combining research styles in the study of energy in buildings. Disciplines. 18th century, we had moral philosophy and natural philosophy. Disciplinary divisions are 19th century phenomena. I won't go into, I could say a lot, but I won't. The only point I want to make is they're a slippery category because they're both a professional category and, in some people's mind, an intellectual category. They're the basis on which we get jobs and get certified and have textbooks. And most people kind of think they're also about something intellectual. But actually, they're not the primary locus of research. Certainly in my area in sociology, I often had far more intellectual affinity with people who were in other departments than with my colleagues in sociology. Research communities don't map one-to-one onto disciplinary categories. So if we're thinking about the problem of how to study energy in buildings, let's just talk about the intellectual problem, because that's what I think today is about. And in that sense, I want to introduce perhaps the interest of looking at something called research styles. The concept of research style comes from Ian Hacking. He's a philosopher of science. He wrote a very well-known book in 1983 called Representing and Intervening. And I think most of us can agree that whatever else it is we do in our research or in our science, if you want to call it science, it involves some element of developing a representation of the thing it is we want to study and using it to intervene, whether it's in an experimental way to produce knowledge or whether it's to actually have some kind of impact on the world. But the other thing, Hacking went on in his second phase of his career to study and to talk a lot about something that he called styles of reasoning. And the notion of styles of reasoning draws on work by a guy named Crombie, who was talking about what we'd call the natural sciences and said, look, there's mathematical reasoning, there's probabilistic statistical reasoning, there's experimental reasoning. In biology, there's sort of genetic types of reasoning. And each one is quite distinct, and each one can be characterized by a distinctive type of question a type of representation or model, types of techniques or tools or instruments, types of explanations and types of claims. And Hacking's point was these are really quite coherent, very general wholes. They're much broader than a theory. But the different styles of reasoning do different things and set out to do different things. And I kind of want to suggest that, at least for me, within social sciences, we can think of there being two very distinctive styles of reasoning, one of which I'm going to call positivism for the lack of a better word, and one of which would be called interpretivism. Now, these sometimes map onto the distinction of quantitative, qualitative methodologies. I'm not so comfortable with that because you can take qualitative data in a very positivistic way. So this is the best I have right now. So I'm not going to do justice to positivism because what I want to talk about is interpretivism, but very, very loosely, positivist research, and again, very loosely, ask questions about what is or what will be if some of the techniques that they use involve statistical modeling or systems analysis, tends to involve a rational, technical, engineering kind of approach. And the kinds of claims or what counts as a finding or what counts as knowledge tends to be generic or universal claims. In contrast, interpretivist research asks questions about how or why or variations, tends to involve case studies and analyses of processes and meaning. And I really want to emphasize a lot of it is about studying processes. And that's where I think there's a real genuine contribution that it might have something to offer. The kinds of explanations or approaches would involve historical, institutional, social constructivist kinds of explanations. And again, another key point is the kinds of claims or what counts as a finding tends to be case-specific claims. And interpretivist research generalizes, but it generalizes on types of processes, not on specific outcomes, and that's quite a different endeavor. I put a list of some of the kinds of interpretivist theories that I think figure in the research on energy and buildings. They all combine a focus on meaning and process, but at very different levels of analysis, different types of questions, methods, data, and claims. So there's a big variety within that style of the style of reasoning interpretivism, just like there's a lot of different theories and models and methods and ways of working within positivism. Most of the work that's being currently done in the area of energy and building using interpretivist approaches is on occupant engagement technologies. It's a super important area. There's been some really path-breaking contributions. I think I have one point here. It's kind of to make a plea that interpretivist research has something to add, to contribute in other areas of the problem of building energy. For example, studies of technologies and policy mechanisms in use, i.e. studies of implementation, studies of changes in dominant templates in the wake of new opportunities and constraints. And when I talk about dominant templates, I'm thinking about things like dominant business models, supply chains, design templates, the distribution of risk and responsibility, professional identities, the division of labor, and studies of variation in national and local responses to the low carbon energy agenda. So those are just some of the areas that I think there's a lot of room for people who want to use it and mobilize interpretivist kinds of research to contribute. So just to end, what does that mean for interdisciplinarity? And when I think about what do we mean when we talk about interdisciplinarity, or what, and this is the part I'm really not sure of, so I'm throwing it out as a suggestion. I'm happy for somebody to come back and say it doesn't really work. It seems to me we're using the word interdisciplinarity in three quite different ways. And I don't know how much it helps to distinguish between them, but I'll try. One is there's a use of interdisciplinarity where it sort of refers to an idea that different people know different things. And if you put people who know a lot about the law, and people who know a lot about buildings, and people who know a lot about contracts, and people who know a lot about physical energy systems, they will have interdisciplinary research. And in a lot of ways, that's actually a really valuable contribution. So my point here isn't to dismiss any of the three ways, it's just to say they're different. There's another notion of interdisciplinarity, which is sort of the notion that the disciplines map onto different theories, or that they actually have, and they do have some kind of intellectual traction. I mean, there is an economist way of thinking which is different than a psychologist's way, which is different than a sociologist's, because they have different training, because what counts as knowledge is different for lots of reasons. So I'm not saying it doesn't work. So there's a notion, and that's where I think my colleague's notion that you could maybe bring in a few variables from psychology and put it in your economic model, and that is a kind of interdisciplinarity. I think the point I only want to make is both of these kinds of interdisciplinarity involve relying on a single style of reasoning. And that's why it works. And it works really well, and it's really important. problem that concerns me, partially because I'm an interpreter of sociology who works in a school of construction management and engineering, is how do we bring together research from interpretive and positive styles? And I want to suggest that we could try to start thinking about a multiple style interdisciplinary research which combines positivist studies of the energy system with interpretive studies of local, variable, socio-technical, environmental processes which produce and sustain it. I had a great analogy from the Human Genome Project, but I don't have time to develop it, so I'm going to skip it. So what would that look like, that multiple style kind of thing? If, again, very stereotypically, this is the model of single style interdisciplinary research. You have a research topic and a question, you get a bunch of people from different disciplines together, or you get a bunch of variables or a bunch of theories from positivist research. You develop a holistic, integrated theoretical framework, and you're off you go. That's our usual model. I think if you're working with multiple styles, we need to think about a different way of combining research and output. So the suggestion I want to make is that instead of trying to develop integrated, holistic theories that bring together positivist and interpretivist research, which to me is sort of an oxymoron that doesn't work, and loses the specificity of what both have to contribute, or what the multiplicity of both types of reasoning have to do, we could think about more creative research designs where positivist research involved a set of findings or posed a set of questions that were then pursued by interpretivist research, and it had a kind of circle. And so just to sum up, what seems to me is that we can use interpretivist research to identify new topics for positivist research, to specify the mechanisms and processes underlying relations between factors or system components, to document and explain variations in general relations. And we can use positivist research to identify general relations to be explored in interpretivist research, and to test general descriptive propositions that are suggested by interpretivist case research but aren't established. And that's my 10 minutes.
Thank you, Libby. Thank you very much. Just before you come forward, can I just ask if there are, can I take one or two questions of fact? Steve.
Steve Cowell, University of Salford. Thank you very much. Very, very interesting talk. The issue is that I wanted to try and encourage you to say a little bit more about going into methodologies where disciplines combine. Some of your ideas seem to be saying we're working in our own disciplines using our own methods. But, you know, if we actually get into action research and these types of things, I'm coming from the technical side, not from your side, then you know, we seem to get into problems you know, in terms of what is real data and what's opinion.
I don't know if I can say something about real data or opinion, but what I can say is I think that what is, first of all, interpretivist research involves lots of different kinds of fields. And I think if you look at any sort of the quote-unquote marked good journals, whatever those mean, when they have tried to combine different theories, they end up, the methods section or the theory section has 3 pages where the author has to spell out the assumptions of one theory, the assumptions of the other theory, how they might fit together, what seems to be, how they fit together and where they don't fit, and how they'll be used in this particular study. I think what this, part of what's implicit in this is a bid for reflexivity. And when you're doing action research, it's in some ways the same thing, to be very, that part of what action research forces you to do is to question your own assumptions and presuppositions through engagement and dialogue with somebody else. So I think this is kind of a plea for that done on in a much more rigorous, systematic way all the way through. So there are ways to put things together, but we need to be aware that they don't fit together easily, identify where the tensions are, make that be a fruitful way to learn new things rather than assuming it's a problem. That's the sort of answer to the question.
Okay. I'm going to have to stop it there, but Libby, thank you very much for that. Jim, are you happy to speak to this slide?
I am indeed, Paul. But yeah, I think I'm probably the odd one out here, you know, in 2 ways. First of all, because I don't do buildings research, that's not my subject. And secondly, I don't have PowerPoint. So the two reasons for being the odd one out. Now, I do have a paper in this special issue that started out as a bit of a rant in relation to a B.M. Bonnet I have. But the helpful comments of some referees and the editors who sort of restrained me in a bit, and it's now a much better reference paper than the first version. Now, the reason I had a bit of a rant you know, comes from my kind of career history. I was research director of the UK Energy Research Centre from 2004 until the end of June. But before that, I was director of the Policy Studies Institute, which was a completely different kind of beast, which had an environmental policy group, which Paul Keating's led, but it also had a social policy group and a labour markets group. And the bread and butter of the Policy Studies Institute was actually evaluating interventions in social policy and labour markets. And when I then came out of that world and returned to the world of energy from whence I came, I was shocked, in a sense, by the lack of rigour that was employed in the energy field for actually evaluating and understanding the way that policies operated. I mean, the labour markets intervention stuff was really sophisticated in terms of the design of the interventions, the econometrics that was used in the evaluation, and rigorous approaches to control groups and randomly assigning people to the two groups so that you could do it. This was really the gold standard for doing things. And when you come to a field like energy, which is dominated by scientists and engineers, the irony that the evaluation was done so unscientifically and non-rigorously was really quite a shock. So when I came in, well, part of my little mission, as it were, was to make sure that the evidence that was available for policymakers was actually much more rigorous than had been in the past. Now, I should say this is not a criticism of DEC, because Adam from DEC, I'm sure will see all the improvement. I wouldn't say there's an army of social researchers in DEC now, at least there's a platoon, as it were, you're working on these issues, so progress is being made. Now, one of the things that we did when UK ERC was set up to introduce this thing called technology and policy assessment, which actually borrowed heavily on systematic review in other social domains, but we applied it to energy, but didn't shout too loudly about the methodology, and that's been very successful. But I think to focus particularly on the buildings area, I mean, it still seemed to me that there's two kinds of ways that more socially informed research can help. And one, I think, is very close to what Libby was calling the interpretivist sort of tradition, where if you understand qualitatively how social practices emerge, it can be enormously helpful in suggesting the kind of policies that can make a difference. But what more of my paper is about is actually the second strand, which is much more positivist, I would say, if you can put it that way, which is about this question of evaluating interventions rigorously, effectively to understand what works. And it was my hunch that Steve Sorrell down at Sussex did a good review of how different evaluation techniques have taken place and been applied, and concluded indeed that there were much less rigorous things used in the energy sector than in many other policy domains. And also that it was actually probably done more rigorously in the US than it was done in Europe, was actually another finding. And it is interesting the difference in the way that things happen, because in the energy sector, most of the policy interventions have been delivered by private sector entities operating under obligations. Now, what that meant is, the reason that the Department for Work and Pensions did things so rigorously is because the Treasury insisted upon it, because it was taxpayers' money that was being spent on it. It's fashionable to diss the Treasury. In this case, I think they were doing very, very good things and making sure that the standard of evaluation was high. Now, I think the assertion I would have is that we actually now have quite a unique opportunity to develop that more rigorous agenda in the energy and built environment. And the National Energy Efficiency Data Framework that's coming through, the availability of data for smart metering means that through administrative types of data, it will now be much more possible to apply these rigorous gold standard evaluation techniques to assess what kind of how interventions have actually succeeded. And so the possibility is absolutely there. All the nuts and bolts, all the instruments could be done technically, but I think one of the interesting things is the non-technical barriers, if you want to put it that way, to using these sort of gold standard evaluation techniques. And I pick up basically 4 areas in the paper why it is challenging. And the first one lies at the more political level. There have been a lot of reviews of how gold standard evaluation took off in other domains, and it's taken decades to get it moving in the US. And one of the barriers is at the political level, whereas some of the commentators say politicians like the take-off phase of a policy much more than they like the landing phase of it, effectively. An innovative, new, flashy kind of intervention is much more exciting than the bread and butter part of sitting down, waiting for years to see what works and learning the lessons. I think one paper I picked up talked about the difference between bloated promises and political rhetoric and authentic programme goals. And I won't say anything about the Green Deal when it comes to that. So there is an obstacle, and generally if you do rigorous evaluation, you will find probably that your policy was less effective than you would have thought otherwise, and that is actually a political obstacle, I think, there. Another issue is around at the delivery level, the agents who are actually delivering the policies on the ground. If you're evaluating rigorously, there's a much tighter knit link between the implementation process and the people involved in the evaluation. And that can, as we know from the Policy Studies Institute, gave rise to tensions where if you're getting into random assignment, the people who were delivering the policy on the ground resisted it because they had certain clients that they wanted to steer to one part of it. So that delivery issue, I think, is also a question. I should say, I was on the advisory forum for one of the big 6 energy utilities for quite a long time. And when I tried on these ideas, that they could try this rigorous evaluation, it was clearly not going to go anywhere. It was much easier to hand out, light bulbs than to evaluate the thing rigorously. One thing that's very important is the ethical aspects of all of this. The question of data privacy and how you use it has been acutely sensitive in places like the Netherlands. The government's current position, which I think is absolutely right, is that the privacy is the default option, that people's privacy does have to be respected. And certainly that introduces a tension between what you could do through rigorous evaluation principle and what people might actually find acceptable on the ground. That's a very important issue. And I think the final aspect is the fact that we still have a lot of the delivery here taking place through the private sector rather than the public sector, which I think in a competitive environment, in the United States you effectively still have regulated monopolies, which makes things a bit easier. But where you have competition, I think enthusing the private sector for this is going to be much more tough. So basically, to round it off, Bob, I think that there is a real opportunity to deliver energy policy for buildings in a much more rigorous way going forward. But it's not going to happen overnight. In other fields, it needs to be a campaign, almost an alliance between the researchers and the more analytically inclined public servants who are engaged in the process. And I think we do need to be acutely aware of the sensitivities around the ethics and the data privacy issues that are in there, because if you fall over on your face on that one, it will damage the possibilities to a very large degree. I'll finish there.
Thank you very much. Bill, your absolute hand go up.
It's very interesting, this, but my experience of policy in this area is rigor has been used as a smokescreen for not doing it. Because what you find is the information that comes through as interpreted is actually rich, but is dismissed as anecdotal, but often it is not anecdotal. You can often tell by the study of one building elements of a complex system which you can then test in a more rigorous way. And what I'm afraid of is people use absence of data as an excuse for inaction or putting it off. And we really are in last chance saloon now, so somehow we have to find a way of fast-tracking this, because we have learnt a lot over the past few decades, but somehow we must get on with it quickly now.
Thank you very much for that. Chip, do you have any responses?
No, just it was another tension that I should have mentioned around the delivery part of it, because obviously if you, for example, do random assignment, you actually need, as an implementation issue, you need to forget certain things, pieces of knowledge, in order to do it. So there's a tension between whether you want to be effective quickly in the short term, or whether you want to learn longer term lessons that might be applicable, because you would do things differently depending on the priority you gave to these objectives, I think.
David?
Just a comment in relation to both those points. I think one of the things that we can get trapped with evaluation of energy policy is to apply the types of standards we expect in medical research to the energy area. Really, it's a matter of working out, how bad is it if it goes wrong? People aren't going to die if we roll out smart meters and they don't work. So you've got to back off on your level of evidence, and I think this means we don't quite have to go to the same level, and there's a danger, I think, within government of thinking everything has to be to 95% confidence interval, where it's just not appropriate in many cases.
I'm sorry, one last question.
I
The questions so far have been statements. I don't really know.
I want to be to support what's been said in terms of that we are in a war kind of situation, and you can't back off in a wartime situation and tell your enemy to stop fighting you for a while until you get yourself sorted out and have a rigorous approach to it. And I think that's one part of this, that we have to set that it's a two-track process that we have to go on. One where we are actually fighting something right now, and with the information we've got, we must make the best movements we can forward, whilst we still do the research. And the feedback between that two broad groups, clusters of action, is very, very enlightening, and generally you find it much more useful than just having a single, very definitive method of research, which actually does not get the feedback until later on, and therefore we delay any action, or good action, or even bad action. So I think that it's something I'm begging for two strands of stuff, quick and dirty, as well as long and rigorous.
Thank you, John. Do you have any last comments? Then, in that case, I'd just like our next speaker is Colin Axon, who is going to be talking about the tenancy commercial sector. This one.
Same shape. Yeah, no. Am I going backwards?
No, you're going forward and just the end of my thing.
Right. Unfortunately, an interesting picture seems to have got washed out behind there, which sort of illustrated the point. Now, whether I am merely the mouthpiece today for this group of people. We come as one. You take us on, you take us all on. Which means I ask the others to answer all the hard questions. But it's interesting. It was interesting listening to what Libby had to say, because I'm not sure which of those two categories us lot fall into. Because we started from this point, and I think this is a point worth making, that we had our little silos. There's a couple of engineers in there, and there's someone who knows quite a lot about sociology and how people use energy, and there's someone who knows things about buildings and stuff, and then there's someone who knows about law and legal and what have you. And we all had our own little silos, and we came together recognising this problem. But it took us about a year of regularly meeting to understand each other's methodologies, ways of working, terminology, and all this special bits which, when you've grown up in a subject, you just take for granted because you're absorbed. You just absorb it through your training, and you have to unlearn all that and then relearn how it fits with other things. And that process is not easy. It takes time, but it is the way to get towards having a multidisciplinary team. Now, I'm not saying we've reached the nirvana of multidisciplinarity, but we are on the way. And it enables you to start thinking about problems in a different way, and to bring to bear all of the different aspects in a meaningful way, as opposed to saying, hey, I know about this, I know about this, and then we'll work out how it fits later on. You think about the problem collectively, and that's what we are beginning to do. And we hope that that gives us a unique window on this particular problem. The problem that we're actually thinking about is what's known as the split incentive problem. And what we'll do is, I'll explain about what this is and then give some examples of what we mean by it and kind of where we're heading as a way of thinking about how the research agenda for this problem might go. And that's what our paper was about. So the cartoon says, yeah, we can save energy. And there's someone going, well, I don't pay the bill. Not my problem. It's somebody else's problem. the split incentive problem. So if you apply this to a building, the landlord owns the infrastructure, the tenant pays all the bills, and possibly doesn't actually have any control over their environment, very little control over their environment. So they can't change things. Even if the tenant wants to be more energy efficient, wants to change the double glaze, change the windows to be double glazed, whatever it is, they may simply not have the control to do that. So we also have another washed out picture behind there, which the first picture, I should say, was of Canary Wharf. So there was a couple of office buildings and Canada Tower in the background. And if you take Canada Tower, I can't remember, it's 48 stories or whatever, that's not one single company. A company might rent half a floor, it might own rent a whole floor or several floors, depending on the size. So there is a whole set of companies and activities and functions going on in that building. Canada Tower, as it happens, also has a shopping centre buried in the bottom. And so you can think of that set of organisations as perhaps some sort of community. And I'll come back to that later on. Now, the other way, the other sort of large entity which fits this tenant-landlord relationship is a shopping centre, and there is a shopping centre behind there, believe it or not, which has, well, it's not one of these shopping shed places outside the city centre, it's a sort of covered arcade type with multiple floors with perhaps one large tenant, the anchor tenant, which is the sort of the John Lewis, the Debenhams of the world, which are the big thing which draws, the owner of the shopping centre hopes will draw in people. And then there are a set of other retail units, smaller retailers of varying sizes, and perhaps above there may be offices. This is simply one way of looking at it. This is not definitive by any means and doesn't represent any particular shopping centre. So the landlord owns the building. They may employ a facilities manager who may be their direct employee. That facilities manager might be some outsourced third party whose only relationship with the landlord is through some contract. The facilities manager looks after perhaps all of the communal services. Perhaps the anchor tenant, because they're big enough, and maybe some of or all of the retail units may have a say over where they get their electricity from, but they might not. That they may or may not have any say over where they get their gas from. So there is you can begin to see that there is a sort of complex web of relationships between different actors in this regime. So who's got control over what? Well, in this case, the shopping centre magically appeared. Wait. That wasn't planned. So the facility manager may have sort of control up to here, and these poor folks may only have control over, if they do have some sub-metering, over these parts here. And the poor office tenants may have actually no control over anything whatsoever. So you can see that even if some of the retailers say, look, actually we want to improve the insulation in this building, it's lousy. The heating system is terribly inefficient. We want to change it. They may have no say on that at all. And this is what we mean by the split incentive problem. But it's made up of a whole host of interactions, which is what we want to unpack. The landlord may simply look at this as a black box and may say, well, it's something that brings money into the firm, company. That's it. It has expenses, minimise the expenses, maximise the return on rent. So they may be very detached from the activity. So what are some of these activities that are going on? We've decided to look at it with five principal areas. And this is not exhaustive. I've just mapped out a few ideas here which need to be thought about when you're looking at something as complicated as a shopping centre or a multi-tenanted office block. Now, as we've just picked up a few of these, underlying it all are people. It's not buildings that use energy, it's people. And the reason that a lot of this needs to be done is because people want to use facilities, they want to be able to do things, they want functionality. So, getting all this lot to work together at the right time, which might be, in legal terms, when a tenant comes in or when something's being built, so that when the leases are being let and being agreed in the first place, that is where you can start to build in energy efficient measures. Perhaps a large tenant may be able to say, I will come to your building if you were to make these improvements. And if you don't make these improvements, maybe I'll look for some other site. But the only way you can start saying these things and putting some meaning on them is if you've got the right information about what the building could operate as, how efficient it could be, what the value of those savings might be, what the value of the property might be after refurbishment or improvements, how it might change the rental yield, what the payback time might be on any of these improvements. And that could be perhaps built into the lease structure. And there is this area called green leases, which there are a few nations around using, or companies using green leases, but it's an open question as to how green they really are and how stringent and demanding they are. But it's a matter of bringing this together, and it's got to come together at the right time. So, how might we do that? One possibility is to say, well, if we do think of these buildings as communities, and you could think of some of these very large multiple property owners who own properties not just across one country, but across the globe, you can think of those as fleet landlords, and they have their way of doing things. They have their own company culture, their expectations. The same might go for very large tenants, whether they be large accountancy firms, whether they be Sainsbury's or John Lewis or whoever. They have their own company culture as well, and that could perhaps be exploited at the right time in order to help improve the environmental and energy performance of buildings and shopping centres and large office blocks. So we see that there are perhaps three ways of you want to examine what's going on. Yes, at the building level, yes, at the company levels, but also what the general context of the economic environment, environmental legislation, the state of that, and what perhaps the culture is towards environmental matters within some particular nation, if it's a global company. Right. So my last slide. Again, behind here is this building. As an example, that's the Deutsche Bank's headquarters in Frankfurt, and they have an enlightened energy and environment manager who persuaded Deutsche Bank to say, well, they take lots and lots of offices all around the world. And they said, well, when we're moving in, we want to improve it. We want a better environment for our employees, a better building for people to come to visit, that persuade people to give us business, etc. And their energy manager said, well, I'll build the business case and he was told, if you can get payback in the length of time that we might stay in that office, just do it. Don't tell us about it, just get on and do it. And they have done. So that's one example of where it might happen. Sue has plenty of other examples in Australia where companies are starting to use green lease structures with energy matters built into it. And I'm sure she'll tell you more about that if you ask her. So it could be done, it can be done. There are people out there doing it, but by no means enough. We think you can do better by understanding the relationship between all the various parties. And then I'll stop.
Thank you very much, Colin. I'll take one question. If anybody has a question. Right, I'm sure questions will emerge over the next 30 minutes or so. So what I'd like to do now is, Raja, to move on to you. Just make sure you're set up.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
I was in Stockholm last week as the last speaker in another session, and I got 5 minutes out of my 20 minutes. But this time I got 10 minutes, so that's great. Okay, now the reason for our paper, and I'd like to acknowledge my co-author, of course, Matthew Craig. One of the reasons we wanted to write this paper was over the last 10 years, I've been working with research councils, TSP, industry, on very similar sometimes projects, similar programs, and come across this confusion that has arisen as a result of too many players funding research actually in this area, with a lot of overlaps. And we thought, let's appraise what's happening and try and propose a way forward. We are not trying to revolutionize this, it's very evolutionary. But I think the appraisal is where probably the value lies. I want to touch on the energy demand reduction problem, briefly review housing energy policy, and in terms of research programs, look at some appraisal, and then just go on to a proposed satellite hub model that we've said. Just to remind ourselves that we're focusing on the housing sector because of this. The energy use in housing sector is phenomenal. We know that whatever we do in new build, even if all the homes from today for the next 40 years are zero carbon, we'll only reduce emissions by 5%. And we also know that most of the stock that will be there by 2050 is already there today. We live in those houses. So something has to be done. But it is a wicked problem, and the reason I say it's a wicked problem is because we actually can't do it in a single disciplinary manner. It's not possible. Logistically as well, because it's not just about architecture and building science, it's actually about climatology, it's about occupancy, it's about psychology, anthropology. And these things interact in many different ways. I haven't proposed this model. This model appeared in another BRI issue, which was quite an important issue, I thought. We have a raft of policies. Again, going with the theme of not going into any of these policies, the point I'm trying to make is that some of these are single track, and single track policies often lead to unintended consequences. You can have rebound effects, of course, which might be because of occupant behavior, or it might be because people have used the extra bit of money they have in flying around or holidaying around in maybe unsustainable manners. The technology itself might be unsuitable. We might be actually increasing the carbon debt and over the benefits. Buildings are becoming more complex, and builds here, we know from post-occupancy evaluation studies now how complicated even houses are becoming. They are more like spacecrafts now. There's also a lot of suboptimal retrofitting. I'm involved in an energy and communities project where we are seeing that many houses are being retrofitted using technology that might not be most appropriate. PVs on houses which probably need a little bit of insulation, quite a bit. We're also looking at risk of increased overheating, and I think that this is big because actually I think in this country we don't know how to tackle overheating, because this is not a problem which is easily seen by actually putting more systems in it. It's also a question of design. We have to look at the coldest day and the hottest day of the year now. So try and look at sun shading. There's too much of focus, of course. We are now looking at demand reduction. What about demand side management? Do we really need to do just that? Zero carbon buildings. I've said this before, but they're hard to build. Maybe easy to design, but hard to build, hard to maintain, and very hard to operate. And what we find is that currently research tends to be fulfilling policy rather than forming the basis for policy. And they don't mean the same, because that's where we come to policy formulation and policy evaluation. But things are happening. What we did was we looked at a raft of programs, and there were quite a few. And I do apologize if some of yours have got missed out, because there were a lot, and I think this is out of date now, because things have moved on. We looked at research councils, TSB, ETI, any other industry projects, and what we found was there's quite a bit happening this side now. But still we need to focus on industry and community as well. That's quite challenging because you come across things of commercialization versus co-ownership and co-production. And those are big challenges to address. We then linked the programs with the policies and just hypothetically trying to see where they would probably interact. And of course, there's a lot of interaction that could possibly happen, probably a lot of cross-fertilization as well. And we thought, what do we need? We need a lot of things, but one of the things that strikes all of us is, we all get into competition, win bids, but in the end, what happens to our teams? Coming towards halfway of a research grant, you begin to think, that a team of 10 people that I have now, what's going to happen after 2 years? And I think that is something that is taking over, and many people feel this now. It's also about looking at action-based research. There was a question on it, and I think it's very important. We need to examine this very carefully for 2 reasons. One, action-based research means many different things to many different people. If you had a social scientist there, they would have a very different approach of action-based research. I have a very different view. One of the things I think about action-based research is that you can influence your subjects, which you can't do that in many other ways of researching. But in energy and building research, it's essential because we are testing out the impact of some of the things that we are also doing. And taking an example, these are 4 different programs funded by 4 different bodies. This is Retrofit for the Future, funded by TSB. This is Low Carbon Communities Challenge, funded by DEC. This is Energy and Communities Programs, funded by RC UK through ESRC. And this is the LEAF program, which was very recent, funded by DEC and managed by EST. Where was the linkage? We tried to link this in one of our projects, because probably we wanted to get funding and we had to do something which was very meaningful in that sense. But where was the other linkages? They aren't. The TSB Retrofit for Future program is collecting a lot of information that is of great value to the Low Carbon Communities Challenge and the LEAF program, where people are installing bits of kit. It is happening. There's a community retrofit going on in many communities, without the knowledge that a lot of learning has happened and is happening. So this cross-fertilization seems to be missing. We do need collaboration and transparency, of course, but I think what we have to see this as is a reality check. Engaging with communities and local authorities, I found, actually provides our research a reality check. We might be thinking of things that might work, but engaging with them actually brings out other things. It is happening, I think. Some of this, we had catapults, coming out. But one of the other bits that is happening at the moment is there's a lot of replication. Because we have so many programs, we have so many models, and we've got so many data sets. And sometimes we reach a stage where we came across a community in our Energy and Communities program, which is working with 6 universities looking at the same houses. Now imagine the amount of over-evaluation that's going on there. With 6 academics trying to do similar things and producing similar models. There is a lack of joined up thinking here. The model we propose isn't revolutionary, as I said. It's just talking about trying to provide some kind of structure in a situation which is at the moment quite confusing. And what we suggested was, you have hubs which forms the core, maybe 2 or 3 universities, or working with industry, and then you have specialist satellites which provide that interdisciplinary input. Sometimes academics can't provide it. We need to go outside of it, and this is coming through. The end-use energy demand centers are based on this actually. One of the strong things in doing this is that we would probably have mutual access to data. It's extremely important to make data sets which can be used for multiple reasons in multiple ways. I said co-production, co-ownership is going to be a challenge, and one of the other things that's missing is researchers working with policymakers, researchers working with community organizations. I think research and industry is now coming together in various ways. It's the other 2 that we also need to look at mechanisms for. I'm going to probably miss this because it will give you a thing to read the paper, but I'm going to talk about my final thoughts. I think what I'm trying to say is that we have to move towards looking at collaboration between academic institutions with industry, policy, and regular engagement with communities. We should not forget it, because there are 5,000 community groups and growing. Quiet revolution is happening. We need to look at unintended consequences. Single track policies will not work. They will probably have some consequences already happening. The fragmentation needs to be addressed, some of which is happening. We are seeing a lot of collaboration here. We want to make this happen because we want a critical mass as well. We do want to retain researchers, and this is a plea from researchers as well, that we want to have researchers working together for a longer period of time, because it's not just about the evidence base that we need to provide, but it's also about it's supporting, informing, developing, evaluating, and then reflecting the policy by the government. Thank you.
I will take just one question, if I may. Please, fire away. Filomena.
Hi, it's Filomena Laporta in EDF Energy. Just the slide that you showed about the 4 different competitions.
Yeah.
I must confess, I've got background both in TSB and EPSRC, so it's quite interesting. My question is, do you think that the lack of link between the competitions is because the way the competitions were written forbid the link, or just because it wasn't explicit enough to get the community to make the link?
Yes, I think there are 2 reasons for it. One is that when they were developed, it probably wasn't joined up. When LCCC was happening, retrofit for future was also happening at the same time. The other issue, I think that's more important, is that when LCCC program was evaluated, one of the things that wasn't done well was the carbon benefits of all the kit that was installed in these communities, because they said there's a lack of methodology, and the methodology that was used was very predictive. At the same time, there's a lot of work going on in actually looking at real reductions in energy use and how you do that. And if that linkage had happened, that evidence base which is there, 22 communities times thousands of houses that were retrofitted, would have fed back, and we wouldn't still talk about predictive savings. We would talk about real savings. So it's not just the point at which they were developed, it's also at the point where these programs themselves were evaluated that there was no joined up thinking, I think.
Okay. Thank you very much. We will now have a very short break. We've been sitting still for an hour, so we'll have a very short break, and then we'll get straight on to respondents. So 5 minutes.
Okay, I'm Tajaresh, the Director of the UCL Institute. I will be chairing this second session. I'm supposed to actually be Richard Lorch. I tried to get a haircut like this, but no one even touched my hair. I think my main duty is to make sure that we have enough time for drinks and reception at the end. I suspect my biggest challenge will be making sure that below sticks to time towards the end. But I'm very glad and pleased to be inviting the various respondents to come up and give their cross-cutting perspectives on the presentations that we have heard. We have suggested vague topic areas that the respondents might wish to focus on. I'm sure, like all good academics, they will ignore everything that we suggested and will do as they normally do their own thing. But I think we've got a sterling group of respondents to comment on proposals and the papers that we have presented. So my first pleasure is to invite Adam Cooper from the Department of Energy and Climate Change to give us his thoughts.
Thanks, Taj. Well, like Jim, sorry Jim, you're not unique, I won't give any slides, but hopefully I can talk as eloquently about this area, because a little bit like Libby as well, I'm also a social scientist who's new to the domain, and which somehow is kind of appropriate given the data in your study showing how recent social sciences in a sense have come to the building research sector. And looking at the chart in your research around the 2006-7 point, kind of what happened to make it skyrocket. So it'd be interesting to pick that up a little bit later, perhaps. One of the things that I wanted to sort of tell you about is a little bit about who I am. So why am I talking here? I'm not sort of technically an academic, or sort of formally an academic. I come from an academic background, but I work in DEC as the head of social science engagement. So I'm coming at this very much with a social science hat on. But very much picking up the sort of the multidisciplinarity, the interdisciplinarity, and the tensions that those two terms generate that have been picked up across all of the talks today. DEC is keenly aware of the need to bring together the different disciplines. We have, economists, we have engineers, buildings analysts. I don't know if Hunter Danskin's in the audience today, but which means I'm the only public servant, if you like, or civil servant at least in the room today. But we've got all these. We've got statisticians, we've got the operational researchers, and we're all in there. We know that we need to work together to address the problems and the challenges of understanding buildings. And social sciences and social research and allied sort of disciplines to that have come a little bit late to the party, as I sort of mentioned, but we're growing, as Jim said. We're now this platoon, a band of brothers and sisters, boldly marching into different policy areas to sort of raise the profile of the social sciences within this kind of context of economic and technical analysis. And that includes around evaluation as well, which is, as Jim says, absolutely critical for the departments to actually move forward rather than spin round, if you like, on a kind of hamster wheel. And that's led by social scientists as well, which we see as important because strong as the economics needs to be and is essential for that sort of thing. It's often about field research methods, which is where the social science has the sort of core competency. Historically, as I'm sure more of you know than I do, given my 1 year in working in this domain, it's been a sort of physical and economic discipline. And I was reminded, sort of thinking about this, about something that I saw David Shipworth talk about this need to shift from looking at houses to looking at homes. And I thought, that's a really great, neat way of talking about it. But in the social sciences, we tend to look at households. So maybe the shift is a mirror one. It goes from households to homes, because it's about that integrated analysis of the social and the technical. The two, one doesn't make sense without the other, is the point. And in policy as well, it's understanding people is absolutely critical. I mean, it's no surprise to me that in Policy Studies Institute that the social and economic analysis is kind of all over work and pensions. I've worked in education myself, child social services policy, cultural policy, of course. Social research and economic research is kind of everywhere. It's not so much in the sort of technical and engineering domains in those areas. So that we trying to and that's partly because recognition of people are everywhere. It's interesting the sort of the buildings don't use energy, people do. Kind of thing is, it's not just people using energy, it's people creating systems that use energy. It's civil servants, it's managers, it's collaborations of people. It's not just individuals, it's groups. So there's sort of peoples and all types of social systems everywhere. So the point is that in order to get good policy, you have to get people to do things in different ways. Now, of course, in energy, it's absolutely critical that you get the technical and the economic analysis in there right, because there's no point in asking people to do things that are physically impossible or physically unfeasible or make no sense or not economically viable. So the research has to be fully integrated. That's kind of, in a sense, the no-brainer. The question is, how do you do that? Because what we see in DEC is an emergent sort of, I don't know whether it's inter or multidisciplinary, the way these work, but it's often like a single discipline approach that frames the issue and talks about whether it's, you saw before a chart presented around, the issue is space heating. Well, that's the frame that kind of comes from a kind of technical analysis of the issue. If you go over to the Resolve Centre, or the SLRG Centre, I think it is in Surrey, you might see them talk about leisure. So lifestyle practices being the sort of core use of energy or carbon reduction. And that sort of tension between the two provides new sources of inspiration for different ways of tackling the issue. as I think Bob mentioned at the start. But the real challenges here for making the sort of different disciplines work, as sort of Colin picked up in his talk around, we have the economists coming at things with a certain angle, we've got the social researchers coming at things with a certain angle. We're all desperate in the civil service to be collaborative. There's no question about that. And that can be both beneficial, but it can also be problematic. And trying to work a kind of even collaboration, which requires a shift in a culture, as well as a kind of a mental model about what's appropriate and what's good and what's the right thing to do, is something that is a transition that I think DEC will have to go through, and that will be critical, I think, because DEC is one of the players, I don't know, potentially one of the key players in the sort of applied research domain for consuming and sort of purchasing research, and so the questions that we ask of the research community shape the type of research that comes back to us. So if we're asking you to go away and look at how important is price, in the deployment of heat pumps, we'll get back answers about the price. And it might be a social research study that goes and does, reveal preferences studies with economists, and that's great collaboration, but that means we've missed all these other things about the style of the heat pump, the colour of it, the meaning in people's households, and the noises they make, and all those kinds of, or more, I suppose, interpretive analysis that can be brought to bear on these issues and augment the deployment overall. So how we actually do it, we have, as DEC, I think, trying to learn from the academic sector that's kind of already out there doing these kinds of, these challenging working together. We heard Colin sort of approaching nirvana before, and I hope DEC can sort of tread that same path. I've come across, I think, Tom Hargreaves talking about a similar thing that they've gone through over at UEA on the low carbon transitions, and pulling these experiences together in an internal cultural change kind of way, I think will be as important as a shift in the direction of the wider research community. The other thing that I've, as a social scientist, am deeply aware of, and I thought it would be useful to get some very specific things kind of mentioned or thrown in there, is that social scientists will do surveys and things like that, and we're really great. There's a big community out there, not doing technical stuff, who are doing the surveys, and they're sampling houses using kind of off-the-shelf sampling frames. But the technical areas that we have here, the off-gas grid, the electric heating, all demand bespoke sort of sampling frames to make things sensible. There's other things like the metrics that we're using. You look in the carbon plan, and they're principally sort of gigawatt hours per pound per gigawatt hours. These kind of technical metrics, rather than, if you like, social metrics that might bring in issues of quality of life or the value of energy services that are provided, which also provide entry points for a wider analytical input. So there's no question that we need to be integrated. The big question is how. And looking at these different models, both at a kind of strategic level that Rajat presented, and the sort of the tactical or sort of team-based analysis that Colin came up with, as well as the lessons that both Jim and Libby pointed to, are things that we're going to have to draw from and try and internalise in order to be part of a sort of transition into a kind of multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary nirvana. So that's me.
Great, thanks very much. All the full insights, and also giving us some insights into how DEC are thinking as well. I suggest we take questions at the end of all of the respondents. So if we could perhaps move on to David.
This thing, David, your presentation is there behind the black screen. Is that going to be cheer up? Is it falling asleep, or is it going up? What we do is probably a right click and then down black screen.
Right, changed our perception of you. 2 seconds.
Right, thank you very much. Bob's asked me to talk briefly about research capacity and research quality. I'm going to flip those round. I'm going to talk a bit about quality first and then move on to capacity at the end. And I understand I've got about 10 minutes, and I've got one of these little countdown timers, which might actually manage to keep me vaguely on track, with any luck. The first thing and this is in part reflections from the practice of research as much as from the theory of it. But in terms of research quality, there are two things which are really, that I'm becoming increasingly mindful of. The first one of these is something that I've only recently worked out how to articulate, and it lies at what I think is a very important part of multidisciplinary and to a certain extent interdisciplinary research. And it's a question of how the disciplines interact and the assumed hierarchy and importance of different disciplines. So for me, one thing, having been involved in a range of big multidisciplinary projects spanning the social and physical sciences, is this question of where validity lies. And it's one that I think we tend to duck and weave around, but is central to quality and research in this field. And the first is the question of whether it effectively lies at the intersection of the different disciplines, or on the right-hand side, the union of each of them. Now, many of us would probably say that we think it lies at the intersection, so effectively each discipline should effectively have a right of veto, where they say that in our discipline it is actually important that if we're going to go out and do a survey which we want to be representative, it needs a response rate of at least 75%. Now, if you're working in these multidisciplinary environments, that would terrify most people in energy and buildings research who think a social survey with a response rate over 50% is a phenomenal achievement. But there is this question which I think we need to come to grips with, and this comes back to capacity later, is to how we choose to define valid research. And is there a point where each of our disciplines intersect, where we can say that this piece of research we're doing is valid from each of the different perspectives? In practice, I think we default to the right-hand side, partly in an attempt to avoid conflicts and internal disputes, and say that any research that is defined as valid by any of the disciplines falls in as being part of the research that we conduct. I think that's a challenge in the practice of research in this field, because a lot of us are involved in big multidisciplinary researches. So that's the first one, which is more a point of discussion and how we might, I would argue we should be doing the left, but we end up doing the right. The second major thing that's exercising me about research quality is this question of uncertainty. And I think that there's a few elements of this in our field which are different from most other fields. I think, and I think I was discussing with Bob earlier, I think there is actually no tradition of scepticism in building energy research. I think we are, by default, likely to accept findings rather than to forensically analyse them. We tend to assume when material is presented as a result of empirical work or models that it's essentially sound research. But I think one of the things we need to do is flip this over and actually be much more demanding of ourselves and our colleagues in terms of the standard of the research that we're doing, and be challenging this, both through a literary discourse. There is no real tradition within energy and buildings research of debate in literature where people are toing and froing and debating the merits of different articles. I think that is actually to the detriment of our field. The other part of this is I think disciplinary boundaries are impermeable to uncertainty, and this is a real problem in our area. Effectively, when one discipline does a piece of research, it tends to hand material findings across to other disciplines, but all of the context of that gets stripped away because it's very difficult to communicate the sort of deep knowledge that goes into how we structure research. So when you do elements of psychological, social, or building physics research, there are a lot of assumptions in there which take years of understanding to accrue. But when we pass findings across, all of that context gets stripped out. And I think that is actually going to be coming back to bite us in quite a significant way. And I think one thing it's important to stress that all knowledge is conditional. The laws of building physics are just as conditional. They're slightly different. They're conditional on the simplifying assumptions we make in order to make the problems tractable.
So we don't do building physics on real buildings, we do building physics on simplified models of those buildings, because that's where the maths works. And we forget to transfer the assumptions that simplify those models across, and then we're sometimes surprised when they don't work. So I think that underneath a lot of the different disciplines there is a common language, but sometimes we need to dig down to actually understand we're all constructing contextual knowledge. The third one is that this is a particular problem in multidisciplinary and sequential science, and a couple of things I've been mindful of recently. I've been looking at things like gas meter data, and I was involved recently in trying to help DEC work out how we might evaluate the smart meter rollout, and then became aware of the fact that the uncertainty in gas meter data, even if we have perfect smart meter gas meter data, the uncertainty in that is so large that it swamps the size of the finding we're trying to observe. So we've actually got, we have to dig down a long way to actually realise that there is a lot of uncertainty underpinning this. And we've also, there's been work recently, a lot of interest in U values, and the fact that what we have inherited and forgotten the origins of have actually now starting to come back, and we're noticing systemic errors in a lot of these underlying data sources. And I think it's back to this business of uncertainty being stripped out, and we need to somehow communicate uncertainty as sort of packaged up with all of our findings. The last point is around research capacity. And my view on this is actually that our capacity limitation is one of skills as much or more as it is of the quantity of energy researchers. I think there is actually quite a degree of desire to engage in this field now from people completely outside of the energy and buildings area. I think the rise in kind of climate change and energy profile has meant there's a lot of interest, but we as a field don't have the capacity to meaningfully engage with people in other disciplines, because I don't think we have the knowledge of the ways in which people construct research and understandings, to respect to Libby's point earlier. We need to be able to converse with them in ways that they can understand, and they need to be able to respect our research. And I think in terms of that, there is a real issue. If you look at the ESRC runs a whole host of programs designed to upskill its researchers. So there is the ESRC Research Methods Festival. There are centres of excellence in different methods around the country. There is no comparable mechanism within EPSRC. There needs to be an EPSRC Research Methods Festival where people can go and come to understand the breadth of research that is done across the engineering and physical sciences, and pushing that through into the social sciences as well. We also need to change the way we manage research. I think there's real limitations on the current processes of research management mechanisms, particularly applications of things like Prince2 project management structures. They're completely inappropriate for managing research, and we need to revisit this and think of new and better ways to do that. We need to do things like in papers, instead of, we will often require people to produce a review of methods in the field. We don't require people to produce a review of models. We don't get people to justify their selection of a particular modelling approach. That should be as required as the review of their justification of methods. And we should look at things like cross-field secondments. We should be in a position where researchers can go into other disciplines for a period and observe how those disciplines work to help us upskill. Because I think if we can do that, then we will be in a much better position to engage with people across disciplines and actually get high quality research in this area.
Thank you, David. I'm sure there will be questions to some of those issues you posed, but before we go on to those, I'd like to invite Alan Short to his response.
Which use the latest technology from the Cavendish laboratories. White paper and a red binder. Very powerful indeed. So, my topic is to talk about research in support of innovation in design and the construction industry. I'm an architect, I'm a professor of architecture, not a scientist, mathematician, physicist, historian, an architect. And I want to start just by making some very general observations. The first one is a little bugbear of mine, which is about the recipients of the research, the design community, my comrade architects in particular. And I think that now there is a fundamental problem with the culture of design education, and that in a way you see the Russell Group schools, like Cambridge, was here of course, and are trying to be, in a way, on-trend fashion design schools. Dean of one of those had very different things really. So that architecture education, you may not know this, is organised so that it is a string of undergraduate degrees. So even at Cambridge, undergraduates have very little exposure to research methodology, never see research papers and so on. And the next degree that they do wherever they go is in effect an undergraduate degree, and warrant entirely upon trying to invent the latest fashionable thing. We've introduced an enormous difficulty at Cambridge, an MPhil degree, which is a recognised Part 2 degree, which is a graduate research degree, as the university concerned, but and very interesting to take very bright young graduates and try to reorient them towards a research culture. It's fantastically difficult, but until we do that, much of the research is going to fall on deaf ears, I'm afraid, and it's a shame, really, because design research is fantastically rich and underdeveloped territory. The other thing that's is a great preoccupation of ours is that there's very little real data on the performance of buildings, and you might not realise that a great deal of architectural publication is actually self-publishing. So the architects pay a lot of money to publishers to publish their work. That's entirely reasonable because they're trying to attract clients and raise their profile. But it becomes confused with the permanent archive of design work. And we're rather sad about that. And as Jim Skase said, very exciting in his paper, that the way that buildings are designed and built and used will need to change significantly if we're going to achieve the reductions of greenhouse gases. That's a fantastically exciting prospect. That means that the architecture of the last 50 years or so that is no longer fit for purpose. It's come to the end of its ride in a way, and for young designers, this is a fantastic opportunity. I very much enjoyed reading the papers, the whole journal really. And I just thought I'd draw a few points from each one. For Libby's, I particularly enjoyed really. There she is challenging deeply ingrained views on the nature of academic research and construction, broadening the field. And she observes that inter- and cross-disciplinary dialogue is very difficult. Yes, it is actually. I mean, at Cambridge, interdisciplinary research is still thought to be slightly dodgy. They're very, very traditional views about research. And of course, for us, in architecture department, that's a rather difficult thing to cope with. The coding that she's done, I have huge sympathy with that because we've been grappling with coding texts, and fantastically tedious it is too. But she said it reveals a genuine interest in energy demand across all the journals. That's fantastic, really, because we are very keen on energy demand reduction through clever design. Before one starts gluing gadgets onto the building, it's the source of a lot of tension with our engineering colleagues next door. She says that construction researchers are missing opportunities to investigate all kinds of very interesting things, social, financial, institutional, organisational things, and the constraints that shape industry's engagement with energy issues. This is a fantastically interesting field. I'm a practicing architect too, and my research group is connected into 2 PFI projects, so we're at the coal face really. The PFI experience is entirely dismaying and utterly extraordinary. So we're on the club, we're on the PFI team for a very large new hospital in the south of England. And at the first meeting we went to, the BP professor at Cambridge, Andy Woods, he mentioned the issue of climate change. You know, what contingency is there in the design, emerging design, to deal with climate change? Project manager lost his temper, barred everybody from mentioning climate change until he'd had a contractual derogation from the Department of Health, which he said was very unlikely to come. At which point, my colleague Andy was started to roll his sleeves up, and I thought it was going to get very ugly. But it was an astonishing exchange, really. I think Libby bemoans the fact that, that a lot of the non-technical analysis that she looked at or a heavy reliance on financial data. Well, in the construction industry, money is never very far from anybody's minds, really. But we're extraordinarily interested in social behaviour. We've been doing a lot of work in acute hospitals the last few years, and NHS board behaviour, trust board behaviour is driven by NHS targets on achieving an unbelievable number of policy intents. I'm sure you know better than I do: privacy, dignity, consumerism, safety, and a respectable whole trust energy performance. It's not at all to do with saving carbon or realising opportunities for adaptation to climate change. You know, I was with the head of States and Facilities Policy on Tuesday in Leeds, and he explained that, you know, chief executives' life these days is between 18 months and 2 years. That's no time at all to do anything except survive, really. We're very interested in behaviour drivers. And as the authors of that paper say, outcomes can only be understood by the way in which multiple factors come together in particular settings. And we very hugely support the call for case studies, very detailed case studies and comparative research. In fact, we published a book of case studies of real art projects in a lot of detail early in the year, called Geometry and Atmosphere. And she says that little attention is given to construction processes or production. And of course, that is a fantastically interesting area. Turning very quickly to Katie Chander paper, Building Communities, it's a fantastic example of an interpretivist approach. And there's some very interesting themes which are probably insuperable, really, which is the issue of corporate occupiers. Very interesting discussion there about fleets of property owned across continents. Actually, we suspect with the same environmental expectations in terms of the human resources employment terms, so that so the same environments are demanded, cut across any number of climate types. That seems to us to be absolutely critical. I was at the meeting in San Diego when the first meeting of the US Green Building Council, when LEED was sort of invented, really. And very interestingly, someone, I think the president of BOMA, the American Building Operators, Maintenance Owners and Managers Association, was there. And it seemed a very clever way of adding value to buildings. We're a little sceptical in a way about these, about all these rating things, because in a sense they're slightly self-fulfilling. And I think in this paper there's a suggestion that they set a sort of, these policies set a sort of green ceiling, really, and actually don't promote innovation. I think it'd be very interesting to know a little bit more about that. And then turning to Rajat Gupta's and Matthew Gregg's paper, which I thought was fantastically interesting, really. One does notice, of course, that there seem to be lots of parallel calls and people grinding away, doing very similar things. One's slightly anxious about a complete alignment of all of the research in a particular area under one guiding hand. At Cambridge, there's a long tradition of the lone scholar, and the university gets fantastically irritated with academics who say they don't need any resources, they need any money, just need a chair, table, and access to library, and that's how they do their work. But out of those people, you do get extraordinary ideas every so often, and I think it'd be a shame not to allow the possibility for a bit of lone scholar work to actually happen. And action research, well, in a sense, we're action researchers. We actually go out and build buildings for people and then write about them. I mean, there's something slightly odd about profoundly affecting the phenomenon that you're observing. I'm sure it's fine as long as there's somebody else who's detached and observing that as well. So I think that's all I've got to say, except for one bonkers idea, which is that I'm very surprised. I remember when I sort of entered academic work, surprised that there isn't a research council set up to promote design. given the huge excitement that successive governments have exhibited about the creative industries and the huge contribution to UK trade and export. And it seems to me we have got money from Research Council for Design, but we've been rather skillful in conceiving it really. So that seems to be quite surprising. I think that it would be nice to have start a discussion really about a research council that was specifically set up to fund design at the highest level, engineering, design, aeronautical design, also something to do with buildings and energy. Anything that had an actual designed output, and welcome that and fund it. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex, for those very well thought through reflections from a design perspective. It's great to hear that the PFI have managed to eradicate climate change. That's the most productive thing I've heard PFI have ever achieved. So it's my great pleasure now to introduce Jeremy Watson from Arup.
Thank you very much. While my presentation's being found, I'm going to present in my other guise, which is the Chief Scientific Advisor to Department of Communities and Local Government. So Adam said to the other public servants here today. I'm one. I'm giving a kind of a joint view, if you like. My term of office at DCLG ends in November. It doesn't mean there'll be any more liberal rights to say anything improper, but it's a bit of a collective experience, I suppose, over 3 years in my term of duty there. I want to touch upon, hopefully, points that our colleagues, Libby, Jim, Colin and Roger spoke about. I think, one comes across positivist versus interpretationist interaction, some positive, some negative, some sceptical, some reinforcing, I think, between those two domains. And when I joined Arup, I worked with architects for the first time. It took me some little while to sort of get my head around that, but I value that enormously now. Tremendous. And we're doing work actually with the Royal Academy of Engineering and REBA to look at the influence of design and architecture in influencing behavioural outcomes at the moment. And Di is here, I think, somewhere I was earlier on this afternoon, is one of our sponsors for that. So it's a really exciting thing that we hope to come out of it. Research needs, Jim touched upon. Hopefully what I show you will give you a broad pass over behavioural and physical research needs, and a bit about regulation as well. The split incentive problem, it's a generic problem, the one that Colin talked about, and another way of looking at it is how do we get benefit aggregation from different domains. So I'm currently chair of the Engineering Interdependencies Expert Group for Treasury, taking over from Brian Collins, and there the problem is not technical, it's actually understanding how to get benefit out of infrastructure owners, be they sort of rail and fibre optic operators, to see the benefit that's bigger if they work together. And there's a particular example I have to tell you because I think this is so salutary, actually from UCLH, which is that the sort of healthcare versus the social care story and the benefits of aggregation. Rough sleepers have a sort of mean age of death of 40. It's the same as it was in the 18th century. It's astonishing and dreadful. But they typically spend sort of 3 weeks out of hospital, 4 weeks, or 1 week or 3 days or whatever in accident, emergency or intensive care, and then they're kicked out again. And the cost to the health service is enormous. If they are put into a hostel, then not only do they live much longer, they probably find work, they cost much less. But I find it unable to aggregate those benefits which have real human outcomes and the cost saving as well, because the system doesn't allow that top-level umbrella organisation to work. And then the final point I think that Rajat made, which I think is really interesting, I'm on EPSRC Council, so I have a particular interest in working effectively, linking between funding initiatives. I think increasingly there is more of that going on. So if you look at TSB's work with the Department of Health and Assisted Living, for example, there is some good work there, where, for example, the Dallas programme links into 3 Million Lives and the whole system demonstrator. But without more ado, I should go on and try not to dwell too much on that. But I felt there was some really interesting stuff that came out this afternoon. I'm not going to talk in detail here. This is just a kind of a pass. We've seen the breakdown of carbon emissions. I'm always amazed by the Keeling curve and shocked by it. There is actually a deep interest in that if you go down into detail in the Keeling curve, that it's a sawtooth. And in the northern hemisphere in the summer, the carbon dioxide goes down. And in the winter it goes up because the southern hemisphere is less able to absorb and metabolize carbon. So it's a curious and amazing balance the Earth has. Even now in the summer, carbon dioxide goes down over the season of the northern hemisphere summer. So maybe we need to be thinking about geoengineering. Temperature modelling, this is really fairly recent from the Met Office, and just shows how good the modelling is. That's really what it comes down to. These days, people look at distributions rather than, so error bars are important. But you can see the black curve is real evidence and the red curve is modern information, and they're working at really high resolution in the computational space now. But what this points to is that things are going to get hotter. What is normal, summer 2003, where 20,000 people died in Europe, 900 in the UK, is going to become cool in the 2080s. So that, for me, focuses my view on this. So I think, in terms of priority, you probably disagree with me, adaptation, actually. If you're going to save lives rather than cutting carbon dioxide, you need to design buildings, making sure the building regs actually take into account urban heat island effect and so on and so forth. In the middle term, maybe it's energy costs and availability, and in the longer term, but we have to start now. I'm not diminishing this at all. We have a 200-year time constant plus for mitigation. So that's just a view. So this, of course, points, as colleagues know, to retrofit as being a major challenge, and 80% of existing buildings, some people say a little bit more, will still be here in 2050 when we have the 80% reduction. We've got those issues that challenge the interventions that government needs to make: cost, commercial availability, complexity. We've got the skills in the environment, and behaviour, which of course I think is extremely interesting as a multidisciplinary factor with the technical aspects. And then of course you get into the pay-as-you-save models. What sort of assurances do you need to give to investors to assure them they're going to get the payback when there's such a great bit of variability due to behaviour? This is another factor. So in retrofit, this is real data from the National Refurb Centre. Carbon CO2 reduction on the bottom here and refurbishment cost up the side. I mean, it's not a huge set of data, but each point is a data point. To get to 20% carbon reduction, the actual spread in the cost is relatively low. But when you get up to where you need to be, it demonstrates that there's a huge distribution in the cost of actually doing that, and that points to skills and standardisation to me. So there is a challenge there, I think, which is a research challenge as well as an implementation one. So again, earlier on, it was alluded to how big a problem is it? Well, it could be a £100 million problem or even more potentially. And if you're looking at £5,000 cost per home, which I guess is a Green Deal sort of estimate that ministers will accept as an upper limit, there are some real challenges there. And I won't go through the detail, but de-risk financial models and checking that the golden rules being met is pretty important. Also, as I'm in UCL, I'm a professor here, I have to say we're doing some work on investment quality energy audits with UCL and the National Physical Laboratory as well to try and provide a believable, independent advisory capacity to people like the banks who are going to be asked to do the private sector pay-as-you-save schemes. So you'll be fully aware of the Green Deal. The main point, the golden rule, the expected financial savings must be equal to or greater than the costs attached to the energy bill. At the moment, I mean, that's going to be done by a priori estimation rather than a posteriori. There's a real need, I think, to make sure that research proves that that's going to be happening. I won't go through great detail here, but the points with respect to that, so the thermal management interventions, can we deploy them, can we predict the savings, and importantly, is the whole proposition attractive to the investment community? Unless you've got reasonable certainty of payback, then that won't be the case. Technically, there are some interesting interventions. If I just go straight to the Nest controller at the bottom, which came out of a person who left Apple. I used to say it was Jonathan Ive, but I met Jonathan Ive a month ago, and it wasn't him. He said that he respected the guy who did it, he left Apple. And I'm working with the Cabinet Office on smart energy and just trying to unpick whether smart controls really do lead to energy savings. It's not necessarily a proven thing. So a few things about building regulations. We have to balance impact, the amount of money that's being saved for industry. Of course, the present administration is very, very keen that we minimise the amount of regulation. But of course, there is also extra costs impacted by these things. And we're trying as much as we possibly can to compensate those ins and outs to leave a neutral or positive benefit. So the issues we're looking at in Part L, new buildings, compliance and performance, and of course now existing buildings, and you're aware of the consequential improvements debate that went on, I suppose, about 6 weeks, 2 months ago. Conservatory tax. For new homes, we've got now the fabric efficiency standard. We've got other considerations being given at the moment. All this is thinking from my colleagues at DCLG, who very kindly prepared these slides, and I guess these will be shared afterwards anyway. And then for non-domestic buildings, looking at those two options, looking at the 11% improvement versus the 20% improvement preferred option, and then the breakdown between, say, two non-commercial types, which I guess is not too surprising, but office and hotel. I was surprised there wasn't more cooling in hotels, and I guess going forward, probably more here. So the existing buildings, consequential improvements, the Green Deal we discussed, the principles of that, and then the specific proposals and consultations. So from October 2012, domestic extensions, loft, integral garage conversions, and from April 2014, when boilers and windows are replaced and non-domestic extensions, etc., carried out, then it's going to need to be a consideration of consequential works. So my key points really, my last slide. I think adaptation is really important. Buildings are a massive contributor, as we all know, to the greenhouse gas footprint. Existing buildings are the main issue. The Green Deal is great, but we've got to make sure that it works, and we've got to make sure that Pay As You Save works out in the private sector. The cost of retrofit is currently high and variable. We need to make sure that comes down. And the variability arising from user behaviour has to be better understood, and also how the design of buildings influences the sensitivity of that building to user behaviour. Thank you.
Thank you for those reflections from a CLG point and the challenges that we face. Can I ask Paul Eakins to give the final response?
Yeah, well, thank you very much. When Bob asked me to do this, he said, well, Paul, the others are going to talk about stuff they know about. Will you just give an overview? And so I said, well, of course I'll just give an overview. Bob by then had disappeared, so I was not able to ask him an overview of what. I'm clearly not going to give an overview of the special issue, because he and Alan Summerfield have done that much better than I possibly could have done, and I imagine you all read that. So I'm just kind of going to give an overview of what I kind of have picked up from relatively recent engagement in this area. I've only been in UCL for 3 years, and although I've certainly engaged with this issue beforehand, it's not at all been as a specialist, it's been as an economist and policy analyst. So I'm going to make a lot of generalizations, which you're welcome to shoot me down for in due course. But then I'm going to make some observations, which I think will be pretty challenging, and then some ideas as to how we might take this forward. Coming to this as an economist, the principal impression you get of this area is that there's shed loads of negative cost opportunities. And you will all know those marginal abatement cost curves, made most famous most recently by McKinsey, but they've been around a long time. And economists call that low-hanging fruit, and it's a very reassuring idea. The other thing which I think the energy price spikes in the 70s, and of course there are people here whose involvement in detail in this area dates from that period, is a desire to understand buildings. So we have the development of building models through the 80s, with the highly revealing name of the standard assessment procedure, which gave us the impression that we kind of understood buildings. So we then go into the 90s with these two stylized facts. A, there's shed loads of low-hanging fruit, which we don't need to pick, because why should we? B, we understand buildings. We then get, at the end of the 90s, climate change and new salience. We need to reduce carbon emissions, and as we go through the first decade of this century, we realize we need to really reduce carbon emissions, so 80%. This is where I do engage with the agenda, because I'm part of the UK Energy Research Centre. I run the energy systems theme. We build energy systems models. There's not a single model run that we've done over the last 10 years that doesn't suggest that if you want to get to 80% reduction by 2050, you've got to decarbonise the building stock. And when you think of how much carbon buildings currently produce, that's quite an ask. At the same time, energy prices start going up. So there's a huge political pressure on people's fuel bills. The concept of fuel poverty becomes very resonant. And we find that the agendas interact because many of the things we're doing to decarbonise supply also make energy more expensive. Not as much more expensive as the popular press would have us believe, but nevertheless more expensive. And that puts pressure on the agenda. So it is time the policymakers think to pick this low-hanging fruit and deploy our understanding of building. And then life gets really tricky. Because we discover in 2010, and how did it take us 30 years to discover this, that buildings don't use energy, people do. I think it was Katie coined that phrase. UCL organised a meeting on the subject. It was news to me. I thought, God, what an insight, what amazing insight. Buildings, you'd have thought that's something you'd have taught in the undergraduate degree of the built environment back in 1982, but no. And we then discover that we don't understand people and their energy-related behaviour at home. We don't have any real data about the way they use energy at home. As soon as we start to collect real data, we understand and come to perceive that buildings don't perform like we thought they did, and they certainly don't perform in any kind of standard way. The way they perform, as Jeremy said, depends on how they are lived in and who is living in them. We then perceive that this low-hanging fruit has a habit of going upwards, and that retrofitting buildings is not cheap. In fact, it's tens of thousands of quid per household. Now that was a number that I first perceived in 2008, I think, the estimates of the existing home allowance. And if it's tens of thousands of quid per household and there are 25 million, well, you get to hundreds of billions, fairly easily. So where are these marginal abatement cost curves now? How do we actually meet the golden rule? Is the golden rule a rule of zero set, in fact, for anything worth doing? We then discover that retrofitting buildings isn't easy. I'm sure David Chipworth is right that it's not true to say, as in the medical field, if you get it wrong, people will die. But it's certainly true to say that if you get it wrong, people can be ill. And a lot of Tadge's work has shown that. With dust mites, we're increasingly aware that the ventilation issue of retrofitted buildings is an absolutely critically important one. And not only might the people get ill, but the buildings might get ill. The buildings can, in fact, be undermined and fall down. And that came through to me when I was talking to a German engaged in this field, and like many Brits, I kind of think the Germans do this right. He told me that in Germany there are huge problems with badly retrofitted buildings that are undermining the fabric of the building. So the potential for unintended consequences is huge. We then discover, which economists should have known all along, that neither people nor markets value energy efficiency. I should have picked this up from the speech I heard Jay Chapman give a long time ago when he said that energy efficiency was terribly boring. And he's absolutely dead right. People find it really, really, really boring at the household level. And of course, at the commercial level, we've got the split incentives issue that we heard a lot about from Colin. But there's any number of other market failures to do with information and the willingness and the ability to act on it that ensure that markets don't work. And finally, as the politicians have discovered, an Englishman's home is his castle. As far as I'm aware, that applies to women and Scots and, well, too. And that mandatory intervention in the home environment is very, very risky. So the third attempt at consequential improvement legislation in this country over the last 10 years looks as if it's ended in failure. It's been called a conservatory tax. It didn't apply to conservatories. It wasn't a tax. But nevertheless, this was a politically resonant phrase which caused the Prime Minister to turn to run at the first sound of heavy gunfire. But we must make policy progress, and we have the golden rule and the eco. And under these circumstances, one may be inclined as a mere academic just to say, well, cheers, Adam, good luck. Go for it. Go for it, boy. You've got to make it progress. Rather you than me. But that won't do. We're all in this together when it comes to carbon emissions, and the research community has a huge joint responsibility. It is indeed a war situation, as John Doggett said. As Bill Audas said, it's last chance saloon. So how are we to proceed? And I've learnt an enormous amount, as you would expect from Taj, and we've been in the same department now in 3 years, and David Shipworth and Bob and others. We've got to ask the right questions, first of all, which obviously we've not been doing in the past. How and why do people use energy? What is the real building energy performance under different circumstances? And how can it be improved in real time through real policy? Really difficult questions. We've got to generate data in ways that we can compare it, analyse it, and understand it. And again, the work of the Shipworths at UCL Energy Institute is very illustrative in that context. It's not easy getting this data so that it means something. And then stuff that Taj has said, we ought to implement these policies, given that we're implementing them largely in a condition of ignorance. We ought to implement them on a relatively small scale to start with. As Jim said, we've got to learn, we've got to evaluate them intelligently and intensively, and we've got to be prepared to learn from the results so that we can adjust the policies and do the same again until we know how to get it right. But we've also got to get on with it, because we've got to reduce those carbon emissions, and that means we've got to resource the activity adequately. And that seems to me to be perhaps the biggest ask of all in the current context of thinking about government spending. Thanks.
Well, I am, like several of our speakers and respondents, reduced to paper. We're trying to do this wrap up in order to make some sense. First of all, I'd like to thank our speakers and our respondents for a hugely stimulating and challenging. I am challenged by what has been said this afternoon, this evening, by people whose judgment I trust and value. So I'm extremely grateful for that. Not that I found myself agreeing with quite everything. I would like, for example, to suggest to Jim, perhaps, that the emphasis on gold standard evaluation should not draw attention away from the ability of case-based research to essentially deliver black swans. And I have 2 examples of black swans, one published and one unpublished. The published example is the party cutting wall bypass, which was seen once and resulted in a change in building regulations. The second is the anecdote which was relayed to us by residents at the scheme which is heated with combined heat and power and district heating, and the residents didn't know that they didn't have gas boilers. And that tells us something very about the bounty that district heating has to climb in order to be acceptable to occupants. Going back to the first, the other side of my paper, I would now like to thank a number of people who have been involved in putting this event together. First of all, I would like once again to thank Richard Dorch, who I hope is recovering quickly, and I hope to see very soon. Without him, this certainly wouldn't have happened. I would like to thank Ellie Jones, Rosanna Sales, and Simon Buller, who together have made all of this work at the most fundamental level. Without them, it wouldn't have happened. Indeed, without Ellie, I wouldn't even have got here. As she knows, the first time we came to visit the venue I actually went off somewhere else. I was running a different subroutine. Thank you for the fact that I'm here this evening. Finally, I would like to thank all of you who have participated in what once again has been a rich and stimulating debate. So I think you deserve a round of applause. Now time to either refuel or drown your sorrows or partake of fermented biomass, whichever so behind you. Thank you very much.